Hello, Gabriella. My name's Tom O'Doherty, and you're very welcome to my presentation on the work of Gyula Hallas, otherwise known as Brassai. The question that I set myself for this assignment is, what is it about Brassai's photographs and the techniques that he used that enabled him to become such a renowned figure in the history of photography? But before we answer the question, maybe we'd have a look at what prompted the question. Basically, as part of my previous assignment, I would have visited a photographic exhibition called A Moment of Time in the National Art Gallery in Dublin. And the photograph that I have illustrated on the slide here, Brassai's 1932 photograph of a couple in a bar in Paris, really caught my imagination. A couple of things about the photograph that I liked: the intimate moment between the two people, but also the balance in the photograph and the clever use of the mirror behind the subject's heads to give a certain balance to the photograph. And as I looked further into the work of Brassai for my previous assignment, I became fascinated by the range of people that he photographed. Now, let's have a look at the background, or Brassai's background. He was born on September 9th, 1899 in Brasso in Transylvania, modern-day Hungary, and his original name was Gyula Hallas. His father was Hungarian and his mother was Armenian, and his pseudonym of Brassai is derived from his place of birth, which is actually the Hungarian for from Brasso. His father lectured in the Sorbonne University in Paris, but in the 1910s the family moved to Budapest, and it was here that the young Brassai studied painting and sculpture at the Academy of Fine Arts. During the First World War, he enlisted in the Austro-Hungarian cavalry, and he moved back to Paris in 1929. And it was here that he developed an interest in photography, and he enlisted the help of his friend and fellow Hungarian immigrant Andrei Kertész, who was a photographer at the time, to teach him all he knew about photography. Now, his training as an artist and a sculptor would have influenced Brassai's photography, but two people in particular, namely the French painter Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec and the French photographer Eugène Auger, were both major influences on Brassai's work too. Toulouse-Lautrec was famous for his paintings of prostitutes and dance girls, whilst Auger is famous for his architectural and street photography. Brassai, once he learned about photography, started to ply his trade and became renowned as a night photographer. He bucked the trend of the time, in that because of the slow lenses and camera equipment at the time, most other photographers preferred to work in daylight, whereas Brassai would spend night after night photographing the streets and the street life of Paris. And he seemed to have an ability to mix with all sorts of people, and he photographed everyone from pimps to prostitutes to hoodlums. This resulted to the publication of a collection of his photographs in a book in 1932 called Paris by Night, Paris de Nuit. And this got him acclaimed notoriety. And once he achieved this notoriety, Brassai began to mingle with the Paris elite and began mixing with high society. And he now started photographing the lifestyles of the wealthy, the politicians, and various intellectuals. This newfound fame gave him added credibility with his own contemporaries, including people like Salvador Dali, Pablo Picasso, and Henri Matisse, to name but a few. And after the publication of his book in 1932, Brassai began to work for an American magazine called Harper's Bazaar, in which he photographed people such as Samuel Beckett and Pierre Bonnard, to name but a few. The work with the Harper's Bazaar largely consisted of portraits. In 1935, he published a second collection of photographs called The Pleasures of Paris, and this brought him international renown. The historical context that Brassai worked in, well, in the early 20th century, it was a period of rapid expansion of capitalism and industrial growth, and people began to move away from the countryside into the rural and larger industrial city settings. People began to have a better standard of living among the general population. If you think back to maybe 50 to 100 years prior to that, before the Industrial Revolution, there was large slums and large-scale widespread poverty in the larger cities around Europe. Subjects such as gay rights, lesbianism and prostitution were taboo subjects for the time, and photography and photographic images were of great interest to people because they were a new format. When you think about it, before this, newspapers and any items bringing news from abroad were largely consisted of the printed word, and photographs added a new dimension, and people were becoming very, very interested in this new form of medium. Now I'd like to just show you a couple of my own photographs where I try to replicate Brassai's street scenes and such like, and some of the beauty around my own hometown of Kells in County Meath in Ireland. You can have a look at them in your own time because I don't have time to go into them in great detail here in this presentation. To sum up, why is Brassai important? Well, I believe he was important for several reasons. First of all, his work was groundbreaking for the time because of the limitations with equipment. It was difficult to photograph under darker conditions, yet Brassai was a master of nighttime photography. Obviously, we see more detail in photographs shot in daylight, yet Brassai embraced the night, having once repeatedly said, "The night does not show you things, it suggests them, it disturbs and it surprises us with its strangeness." Whilst a lot of Brassai's images would appear to be random shots based on his artistic training, it's known that he would have actually been very meticulous in his preparations for a photograph. He would wait in position on streets for hours just to get the proper composition in his image. By engaging with his subjects too, he would make them an integral part of his photographs, and you would notice in a lot of his portraits and photographs of people, there's eye contact, and they say that the eye is the gateway to the soul of a person, thus bringing the viewer into the soul of the person that was being photographed. Finally, my methodology. I mentioned initially that I went to the Moment in Time photographic exhibition held in the National Gallery in Dublin. That was in February of this year. And after that, unfortunately, the restrictions in relation to COVID-19 came into place, and my movements have been curtailed for the past month or so, so I couldn't get out to any further museums or art galleries or that type of thing. As a result, my primary research has been conducted online using principally three websites: visualartscork.com, the New York Times.com, and imagingresource.com, all of which I would regard to be fairly reputable websites, and I think the content has proved to be true and can be backed up with through other sources as well. My secondary research was conducted through various articles on the history of photography and photographic equipment that Brassai himself would have used himself, and Brassai himself, should I say, and these were contained in the Encyclopedia Britannica and the Visual Dictionary of Photography. I would have found the Britannica to be a great help. Their articles are very insightful, very detailed, whereas the Visual Dictionary of Photography wasn't just quite as good, but had a few snippets of information that I could use. So finally, all that remains for me to say is a big thank you, Gabriella, for looking at my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any queries, please do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much indeed.